getting ready to square up our quilt. Now notice that we're going to square it up after it's already been quilted. So here I have my quilt top, it's been quilted. I have my backing and the batting in between, and now I want to trim it all up before I can make and attach my binding, right? So in order to do this, I'm showing you an example with a little smaller quilt here. This was probably, I would say, maybe my third or fourth quilt that I ever made, and I never finished. And so I'm sure that it's not completely straight. So I wanted to use this as an example for those of you that are creating this quilt in the quilt along, and maybe it's your first quilt, okay? So don't be discouraged. You can still get it to lay nice and flat, and we'll still get it to be perfectly square. All we need to do is gather up a few supplies. You want a square ruler, and you're going to want one that's kind of big. You know, you want to take up a decent amount of the corners. This is a 12.5-inch ruler. You can also use maybe like a 9.5 or a 9 or 10-inch ruler. Something around this size would be good to start with. Then you're also going to need a narrow, longer ruler, okay? Because we're going to carry out the 90-degree angle that will trim down here. We want to carry it out the entire length of our quilt on all four sides. So obviously this is not going to reach. You want to make sure that you have something else to add to it so you can keep that line going straight along all the sides of your quilt. So we're starting off on this corner, and what I need to determine first is how much do I want to cut off, okay? First we measure our outermost border to see how big it is. And mine measures right here a full 3 inches. Obviously, my quilt is not square right now, so I'm going to tell myself that I should trim away about 1/2 of an inch, and then maybe I'll end up getting the entire thing squared. So it doesn't look like it's too off, and I think trimming away 1/2 an inch will get it just fine. So after you determine that, right, 3 inches, I'm going to trim off 1/2 an inch. Now I take my square ruler and tell myself I need to line up my 2.5-inch mark, okay, because it's 3 inches minus 1/2 of an inch I'm trimming away. The 2.5-inch mark needs to be lined up along this seam here of the outermost border. And keep in mind that the same way I'm lining up the 2.5-inch mark on my ruler with this line, I need to line up another 2.5 inches from here because I'm also needing to trim some off this bottom corner as well. So I'm lining up 2.5 on that line, and now I need to line up 2.5 this way. 2.5. And you may need to fudge your quilt a little bit as well just to get it to line up as straight as you want it, and that's fine. So I'm looking here, 1, 2, 2.5. I have that 2.5 lined up right there. Okay, and then from this edge, we're lining up 1, 2, 2.5. I need to come in some. Okay, and that's pretty close there. So you can see, obviously, if I trim right here, no matter how the quilt underneath looks, it's going to be a 90-degree angle because I'm going to follow the contours of the ruler. So, I'm cutting. Now, after you get past the length of the ruler, what you want to do is bump up another ruler right next to it. Because the rulers are straight, we know that if I bump it up right here, make sure that I'm matching this 2.5 inch also on this top ruler now, right there. So I have that 2.5 inch line going straight through both rulers. I can remove this one and continue cutting on this one. So far so good. Then you just continue that by sliding your quilt down. Again, you don't want to go too far into that corner because when we get to the next corner, we want a perfect 90-degree angle cut. And again, we're going to throw in our square ruler. So let's come back. I'm close enough here. Let's come back in with our square ruler. I have a 2.5 inch going nicely there. Now I need to line up this one with my 2.5 inch from here. So I'm going to slide this down. That's 2 inches. Let me bring it up. 2.5. 2.5 here. And 2.5 there. Perfect. So now I know I have a nice 90-degree angle. I'm going to cut this way and start cutting this way. And then just continue turning your quilt around and repeating the same process You can see this corner right here. Nice, perfect 90-degree angle. It's going to lay nice and flat. When the binding gets put on this, it's going to look great. Now my quilt is completely squared up. It's ready for the binding. You can click right here to watch my tutorials on how to measure your quilt out so you can make sure if you're making your binding that you make the length that you need. And you can also click on the other tutorial I'm linking to here, which is going to show you how to stitch it on by hand on the back side. And I want to thank you for joining me in my first ever video quilt along. I hope you enjoyed it, and remember to keep uploading those pictures to my Facebook page because I definitely want to see all your finished quilts. If you enjoyed this tutorial, go ahead and hit it with the thumbs up, and I'll see you next time.